So hello everyone, so this is part 2 of a set of lecture videos talking about competency 2 for the sustainability course. Again, we talk about ecology and some of the sciences and the scientific method in a previous lecture. And now I'm going to be talking more in detail about the role of chemistry, physics, not geology, but and all these other sciences in the context of our competency. Okay, so this is, in this case, this is an example of trophic levels. Okay, and trophic levels, in this case, are just talking about the level of consumerism or the level of, in this case, usage, in this case, of energy usage per, like in a biosphere, in this case, in an ecological hierarchy. Okay, just to give you an example here, this is actually an explanation or an application of the role of chemistry, physics, and biology in terms of ecology in this case, right? So all energy, obviously energy again is in the realm of physics, on Earth actually comes from the sun, and it enters Earth. Okay, obviously it goes through like the atmosphere, and there's only one type of radiation that actually penetrates the atmosphere, but that sun's energy is converted, okay, by the first trophic level, okay, called primary producers. And primary producers, ladies and gentlemen, okay, with very minor exceptions, are plants. Okay, so plants are primary producers. Everything else are animals. All right. So what happens is the sun's energy is converted then into stored energy by the primary producers in a process called photosynthesis, right? And so photosynthesis, so then these plants then, in this case, ladies and gentlemen, are eaten by primary consumers, which could be animals that eat plants directly. It could be you if you're a vegetarian. It could be a rabbit if it eats the cabbage in your yard or the carrots in your yard, okay? And whichever animal eats the primary consumer, or the animal that just ate the plant, is called a secondary consumer. Whichever one, maybe we should use an analogy here, but let's go here. Like, so rabbit eats cabbage, right? So that's a so rabbit eats in this case, a rabbit eats a cabbage. A hawk swoops down, okay, and eats the rabbit. So the hawk is a secondary consumer in this case. All right. What happens is the hawk gets eaten by, I don't know, like a bigger predator here, like an eagle. Okay, an eagle fights a hawk and eats the hawk. So now the eagle is a primary, a third level consumer, right? What happens is you shoot the eagle and eat the eagle. Now you're the apex predator. Okay, but all of those, from the consumers, from the primary consumers to the apex predators, are animals in this case, right? Now, what happens is things don't eat each other up. Sometimes in this case, in this food chain. Okay, so what actually happens is there are some plants that are left behind and are never eaten by anything. There are animals that's never eaten by any other secondary consumer, right? But eventually, a living organism dies, right? And what happens is there has to be a way in which in this case, the matter that makes up living creatures needs to be broken down into their simplest possible components to be used by, in this case, the primary producers. I'll give you an example. So humans, okay, we are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. All right, generally speaking, like that makes up 99% of humans, okay, and other living creatures as well. So what happens, ladies and gentlemen, is those things like nitrogen, we know, is needed by plants, right? So when I die, now me myself, I'm not talking about you, but me myself. So when I pass, I hope that some part of me is a benefit to the plants that actually, in this case, again, facilitate this food chain, right? But we need decomposers, and decomposers are microorganisms. Okay, they are invisible to the naked eye, but can be seen through a microscope or other much more powerful microscopes like electron microscopes or so on and so forth. Those microorganisms, fungi and bacteria, are actually the ones that facilitates the decomposition of dead living creatures, right? And what happens is this decomposition of living creatures replenishes the soil, right? So that's in the field of geology, and that soil, that nutritious soil, then is required by plants to start this cycle all over again, this food chain all over again, right? Very, very important here. A funny thing that you might be asking yourself is, what is this 110, 1.1%, 0.1% means? This is talking about energy transfer, okay? So let's say, okay, so the sun's energy is converted into into carbohydrates by a plant. So I'm going to use a carrot this time. So we're done with cabbage this time. So a carrot, let's say a piece of carrot is like like a big carrot is 100 calories, right? And so a rabbit eats the carrot. But what happens is all 100 calories from that big piece of carrot does not get stored in the rabbit's body. Only 10% of that 100 calories is, in this case, stored in that rabbit's body. Why? Because most of the energy, right, is wasted as heat, right? Just think about it. What happens to you when you eat something? You're chewing, you're chewing, you're chewing. Well, guess what? That chewing is mechanical energy, and that chewing creates heat, and obviously a lot of that energy is lost as heat in this case. So you never get 100% of what you're eating. You're like, at the best case scenario, only getting 10% of the energy from whatever you're eating. And this is the same throughout all of the energy cycling between living systems in the planet. Okay? Something very important here. So that energy transfer, again, is in the realm of physics. Obviously, this is in the realm of biology, physics, and obviously the soil, we're talking about, in this case, geology. Now, something that's actually not shown here, another important component that primary producers need in photosynthesis, is not just the sun, it's not just the soil, they also need water, right? So water, again, is actually quite important for all living creatures. Most living creatures are predominantly water. Without water, without the sun, without good soil, I'm going to tell you right now, life on planet will actually cease to exist. Okay, so that's a very, very important thing about energy and matter cycling, right? And in this case, ecosystems, right, like this, are actually ruled by feedback systems, and we're going to be talking about negative feedback and positive feedback here. So why is this thing called negative feedback? And the reason why is, and you can actually start anywhere here, right? So if you have too many predators, like so in this case, I don't know if that's a bobcat, okay, or whatever that would be. What happens if you have too many predators? They will eat too much prey. So in this case, hare or the rabbit in this case. So too many bobcats, means not enough prey. So if you don't have enough prey, what happens to the population of predators? They die off, right? And once they die off, what happens to the, like in this case, prey? What happens to the predators if they die off? When the predators die off, you get more prey. So there's going to be an explosion of rabbit population, and if you have an explosion of rabbit population, that means you get more predators, and if you have too many predators, you eat too much rabbits. When the rabbits gets too few, then you get too few predators. The reason why this is called negative feedback is it's always the opposite, right? The resulting thing is always the opposite thing, right? So when you have this whole cycle, right, if you start anywhere, it's always the opposite, right? Too much prey will eventually ends up in too little prey. Too many predators will eventually turn up into too few predators. So it's always the opposite. So that's why it's called negative feedback. All right. In a positive feedback, what happens is an extreme, or in this case, a phenomenon keeps getting reinforced. So heating. Okay. So we're going to talk about climate change here. So ice, ladies and gentlemen, okay, or snow glaciers actually reflect heat. So then the Earth then does not keep that heat, and then a lot of that heat then escapes into the atmosphere and re-enters, in this case the outside the atmosphere. All right. What happens is when it's too hot, the glaciers melt, and when the glaciers melt, the reflections that is normally created by glaciers then becomes less. So too much heat melts a lot of glaciers, and when you don't have enough glaciers, guess what? The surface becomes hotter. And obviously, if the surface becomes hotter, why does the surface become hotter in this case? Because there's not enough ice to reflect heat off the Earth's surface. Now you actually have heat being, in this case, being conducted, or in this case being trapped, all right, by the water. That's the exposed water. When you have too much heat, what happens to the glacier? It melts again. So in this case, melting of glaciers creates more melting of glaciers. So in this case, it's not the opposite. It's not the melting of glaciers create more glaciers. It's the melting of glaciers melts more glaciers. So this is why it's called positive feedback, right? So you melt glacier, you're going to get less glacier at the end. We get too many predators, you get less. Opposite, same. So that's the difference between negative and positive feedback. First of all, there's no such thing as, negative in feedback doesn't mean positive and negative, right? So it doesn't mean good or bad, right? So it just means to say the way that the feedback system works, right? So just to give you a very, very important aspect, like a very important tenet, or a very, very important component of living systems, is systems by their definition are very, very complex, right? And systems by their inherent nature, right, the sum of the parts, all right, or actually in this case, or like if you have a lot of holes, okay, the actual effects of the multiple parts is much more, in this case are exponentially much more than what you normally can see, all right? So here, when we look at a components of a system, so these are subcomponents, okay, so a tree is made of leaves, branches, trunk, water, chloroplast, okay, so on and so forth. If we see them as individuals, what happens is that system, that tree is actually a system for many, many things. First of all, that system, okay, the tree is a home for living creatures. Tree is also, what it does is it also traps carbon dioxide. And we're going to be talking about more about carbon dioxide soon. And the tree, as one tree, is actually part of multiple trees in a forest ecosystem. Okay? So just know that systems are much more complex than we think it is. So there's a lot of interplay with this thing. So let's look at this one right now. So water. Does water make a tree? No, it's this multiple components that makes up the tree, right? But we also know for a fact that if you remove the trunk, well, there's no way, or the root system, there's no way that this water is actually going to be stored in this tree. Okay? Obviously if you deplete any of these little components here, what happens is you deplete any of these little components, it actually affects the whole ecosystem. All right? So just and one of the important aspects about systems that you need to think about is it's actually you have to understand that the effects of the many, okay, the protective, in this case, functions of many things is actually greater than the protective functions of a single thing. All right, so this is actually a very, very important tenet of systems approach here, right? But the problem with that is because of this overlap in systems, because systems are never truly linear, they're actually circular and they actually overlap with each other. When you have problems with the system, solutions to the system is much more complex, right? So complex systems which creates complex problems require complex solutions, all right? It just so happens that ecosystems, the planet as a whole, is a very complex system. And that's why there's still a lot of debate. Okay, we're still debating about whether climate change is real or not. Okay, and because we sometimes do not get the same effect twice.